He had him in his sights. Winter air, thin as glass, presses against the canopy. Sunlight traces the frame and briefly turns scratches into gold. Ahead, a broken fortress staggers home, smoke unspooling like a black ribbon, ribs of aluminum showing through torn skin. Inside, men insist on being a crew. A pilot nursing lift from a wounded wing, a co-pilot counting seconds the way you count breaths, a navigator turning fear into headings, a radio operator stitching hope to static, a gunner watching the bright cold and wishing to see nothing at all. Doctrine keeps the story simple: close, fire, break, return. Ammunition is weight, victory is proof, mercy is not a line item. The intercept is textbook: sun behind, angle clean, closure steady. One press and the ledger smiles. One press and a dozen stories end at once. But the sight refuses silhouettes today. It offers faces, frost-burned cheeks, a mouth shaping a word that might be prayer, a gloved hand pressing a bandage, another hand rising, not to plead, simply to be seen. Across a few yards of winter air, the plane becomes a room, and rooms demand different answers than targets do. He inhales. The engine's note thins to a single wire. The trigger carries 100 briefings and one quiet covenant. Who are you when no one will know? The glove tightens. The glove releases. Time, usually a razor, opens by a heartbeat. He does not fire. He holds station. Then he dips a wing, an undeclared sentence in the grammar of flight. I will not finish you. Fly on. No music swells. The weather keeps its face, yet the sky is forced to accommodate the smallest defiance, a man refusing to let an equation speak for him. He had him in his sights and chose not to pull. Up here, where choices are supposed to be simple, he discovers that being human is a verb, and sometimes the verb is as small and as vast as allowing a single second to live. Winter, 1943, lays a metal skin over Europe. The North Sea holds the color of iron. Wind stitches long seams across it. On briefing tables, grease pencils coax the future into obedient shapes. Boxes, arrows, timing marks that promise control. But the air writes its own arithmetic. Oxygen sighing through rubber, engines chanting old hymns, contrails scratching chalk across high blue. Bomb groups climb in layered ranks, a traveling cathedral of aluminum whose stained glass is turrets turning, settling, turning again. Inside, men wear uniforms within uniforms. Leather and wool outside, ritual and denial within. They speak a narrow dialect, headings, intervals, fuel burn, because larger words, luck and mercy, cannot share the channel. Their world is inches and seconds, a switch that must move, a brace that must hold, a glance that must mean something without becoming a look away. From other fields, other men rise to meet them, briefed in sentences like drum beats, altitude, vector, fuel, attack. The coffee tastes of tin. The jokes fail in the same place. Mechanics curse bolts that seize like stubborn thoughts. If they dream in angles and speeds, proof that craft can outmaneuver chance. As wheels leave Earth, softness is folded into lockers with letters and photographs. Weather, authoritarian and mute, takes its line without asking. Visibility generous, temperature severe, sun bright enough to make kindness conspicuous and mistakes fatal. Cold sharpens performance and steals it back, thickening blood, numbing thought. In such air, decisions crystallize. You can see exactly what you are about to do. Between departure and destination lies a sky large enough to swallow intentions and return only outcomes. A navigator's pencil ticks time on acetate while a human heart keeps a second schedule beneath the ribs. Below, farms continue their unreported courage. Doctrine descends. Intercept, attack, egress, necessary, never complete. Variables it calls noise persist anyway. A hand lifted to testify. Eyes met through glass, the intuition that the right act may earn no citation. The morning, a fighter eased his finger and chose narrow mercy. The sun did not change. The world remained itself. The man adjusted. He stands at an age when ordinary lives widen, yet his has narrowed to a cockpit, a hut with a map, a mess table where laughter is rationed, and superstition guards the door. The black and white cross names him to friend and foe, but the choice waiting in the sky could wear any insignia. His logbook shows a neat hand for an untidy life. Sorties flown, comrades missing, victories credited that warm, no winter night. He has mastered the geometry that keeps a pilot alive. Come in from the sun, burst short and hard, never linger in the tail's arc, break away clean. He flies the airplane and also himself, breath paced, mind trimmed, feelings stowed for landing. He belongs to the church of procedure. Checklists as scripture, brevity as prayer, debrief as confession. Not cynicism, simply the handles men keep when the world tries to polish them away. Still, his body knows he is not a machine. In his pocket a small object knocks with turbulence. A medal from a brother, a shoreline in a photograph, a note that says, "Come back." He does not look before takeoff. Faith, like fuel, performs best when not constantly measured. He understands reputation, the weight of a tally, the nod in a ready room, the way a number before your name buys authority. He understands the other currency with no serial numbers, the story you must live with when the aircraft is quiet. On good days, the currencies align. On some, they do not, and those are the days a person discovers whether he serves only a nation or also his conscience. Altitude builds. Gauges speak in their modest grammar. Clipped syllables prove other men occupy the same risk. Far ahead, dull flowers of flak open, insincere and deadly. He smiles for the body's sake. He will not remember the instant the day tilts from ordinary to defining. No one does. He will remember faces where the mind expects shapes, and the fractional decision that reframes everything. Allow 1 second to live long enough to become a choice. They named it a fortress, but this morning it resembles a prayer stitched to metal with wire and will. Panels hang like torn pages. A once confident turret is mute. The plexiglass nose has flowered into cracks that frost at the edges. Light leaks where darkness should reside. The airplane behaves like a wounded animal that keeps moving because the herd keeps moving. Inside, the pilot's hands practice a blend of tenderness and engineering. The co-pilot becomes ritual embodied. Touch, call, confirm, repeat. Less belief in luck than in attention that sometimes impersonates it. The navigator reorders fear into math, aligning headings through oil-slicked lines. The radio operator manufactures hope from static. A waist gunner rests his weapon and watches because watching is the last sturdy verb available. They have flown through flak that rang inside the fuselage like a bell. They have seen a man not fall but vanish. They avoid the word miracle. Instead, they use headings, time to coast, fuel remaining, language that carries hope without bruising it. At the edge of sight, a fighter forms with the sun behind him, the clean angle of doctrine as if drawn on the sky. The pilot does not speak the obvious. He tastes the air and holds the stick with a father's caution, firm enough to save, gentle enough not to snap what remains. A hand presses a bandage, another rises from reflex. The human announcement, "I exist, know me if you can." Eyes meet through glass on glass. Expectation has trained them for fate as noise and flame. Fate arrives instead as stillness, as the refusal of a finger to move the last fraction. When the wing dips, just enough, the cockpit redistributes its weight. No one cheers, yet something repairs. The idea that enemy and man are not synonyms unless we insist. He approaches by the book. Sun behind his shoulder, energy in reserve, sight picture clean enough to feel. Closure becomes pressure on the eyes. The bomber swells in the ring as if the day were magnifying the test. Doctrine speaks. Finish the cripple, preserve ammunition, respect the tail, avoid sentiment. He listens. Doctrine has saved him. He also listens beneath it, where another voice rehearses. Through frost and exhaust, he reads the room inside the machine. A man pressing a bandage with both hands, counting heartbeats he cannot hear. Another turning, not to supplicate, but to witness. If you end us, know us first. Manuals do not teach that detail, yet it may be the oldest rule of combat. Two people seeing each other changes the arithmetic of harm. He matches speed by craft and restraint. First pressure on the trigger is a door almost opening. Muscle memory waits and finds itself unemployed. He imagines the tracer line, the shudder, the tilt into smoke, the descent that lasts longer in memory than in air. He imagines the ride home after, praise landing like dust you cannot scrub away, not hunting nobility, avoiding a poverty he recognizes without a name. 1 second, then 2, an extravagant purchase where seconds are dear. The target becomes a decision with lives at both ends. No instrument displays this cost, but he feels the account open inside him. The engine thins, breath fogs the mask, the sight floats, surprised to be denied its ending. He dips the wing, understatement as command. In a space designed for killing, he inserts a sentence about restraint. It holds. It asks no permission. The approach concludes not with recoil, but with adoption of a duty the manual omits. Shepherd the enemy until the world can take over. He moves from blade to shield without changing altitude. For a narrow corridor of cold light, two airplanes of opposite intention share a heading, and the war, forced to watch, briefly learns how to hesitate. Crosshairs rest on torn aluminum, then drift across a window where life is busy refusing to stop. First pressure finds the trigger, then leaves it. Muscle memory pauses at the threshold like a well-trained dog awaiting a second command. The engine's hum stretches into a tight, singular thread, pulled between what is taught and what is true. He balances there, feeling the airplane in his hands and the man in his chest, discovering that the two are not always aligned. He sees the path that would be easiest. Bright beads of tracer walking through glass, a shudder, a tilt, a long falling that later would be described in numbers and headings and would never mention the smell, the noise, the faces. He knows the congratulatory nods in rooms with maps. He can hear the tidy phrases, good burst, clean break, home by fuel. He can also hear the quiet afterward, the one that arrives when applause ends and the body remembers what it has done in a way the mind cannot soften. Orders are simplest when faces are far away. Today the sight has betrayed its purpose and given him people. A man steadying a friend's head, a mouth opening to a word the air will not carry, a hand raised, unsure of itself, announcing not a plea, but presence. Faces bring ancient treaties to the surface, edicts older than uniforms. Do not lie to yourself about what you are doing. Do not let speed excuse blindness. The treaty is unsigned and absolute. It has no witnesses and binds completely. He steadies the aircraft and, with it, steadies the small republic of his intent. This does not feel like rebellion. It feels like fidelity to something that survives, changes of flag and fortune. He lowers the muzzle by an intention more than emotion. The sight, relieved of destiny, becomes again what it first was, a circle of clear glass through which life can pass. No instrument reports this shift. The cockpit simply grows breathable. He understands risk travels with mercy the way shadow travels with light. Perhaps someone is watching. Perhaps no one ever will. Perhaps consequence will come in uniform or only in memory. He accepts both possibilities. The decision is taken not once, but held, and holding it is work. He learns the work quickly. He keeps station. He chooses again each second the way the wounded bomber chooses to continue flying. What began as hesitation hardens into posture, and posture into practice. The cockpit expands by an invisible hand, moral space discovering its own dimensions. He feels simultaneously lighter, relieved of an obligation that never truly belonged to him, and heavier, entrusted with a burden no checklist includes. The airplane resumes speaking in its familiar languages, vibration, temperature, the slight tug of trim wanting a touch. The extraordinary closes itself neatly inside the ordinary where it can endure. He inventories the costs without ceremony, fuel spent to hold station, exposure to eyes that may misunderstand, the private reckoning later when sleep asks direct questions. He considers the benefits and finds only one, which is also many. These men will live, and the man who let them will remain someone he can continue to inhabit. The arithmetic is asymmetrical, but the answer is sound. Training parades its maxims in his head. Discipline, aggression, economy, each true and none sufficient. Beyond the syllabus lies the country where a person must improvise a better self with materials on hand. Today, those materials are a wounded airplane, an unarmed gesture, and a second that refuses to disappear. He recalls a teacher who said that character is how you behave when no one is grading you. The sky does not grade, it only keeps perfect attendance. He feels the presence of the crew beside him, not as gratitude, no room for that, but as concentration returned to its proper object. Their energy flows back to survival rather than pleading. The navigator's line steadies. The pilot's corrections grow smaller, more musical. Fear steps a pace to the rear, still in the room, no longer at the microphone. The war has not ended. It has briefly learned to wait. There is a temptation to dramatize mercy until it performs. He refuses it. No flourish, no dipping and wagging like a parade. A quiet, durable bearing suits the act. He holds the decision with the same care he uses to hold the airplane in smooth air. Minimal movements, constant awareness, a willingness to be corrected by reality. He discovers this too. The body relaxes around truth. Shoulders lower a fraction. Breath becomes honest again. The second he gave away returns as strength. He lowers a wingtip. No flourish, just enough for a crew in a failing world to read the sentence written in the language of flight. I will not finish you. Keep level. Hold your heading. The bomber replies with steadiness, the only grammar it has left, acknowledging without diverting energy from the more urgent conjugations of lift and drag, courage and pain. Between them hangs an armistice with no paper and no seal, time to fuel and nerve. The sign commits him to a new syllabus. Sit not as the blade, but as the shield. Watch for threats from sun and cloud. Measure the angles that might deliver a stranger onto this corridor of mercy. He studies the sky as a shepherd reads hills, looking for the flicker that becomes a predator, for the discreet signal of weather turning. The work, though quiet, is exacting. It uses him entirely. Inside the fortress, men register the sign by breathing differently. Relief arrives not as a cheer but as a release of clenched muscle, an extra millimeter in the range of the neck, the return of peripheral vision. The pilot allows one human glance toward the aircraft with the wrong insignia, then gives himself back to the shuddering craft. The navigator's pencil, no longer shaking, discovers the confidence of method. The radio man transmits a message shaped like understatement. Position, altitude, time. That means something larger. We are still in the world. He wonders who they are. Whether the man with the bandage has a sister who will ask about the scar. Whether the pilot's hands smell of engine oil at day's end the way his do. Whether this hour will become a story told rarely and with care, or a silence carried gently and never dropped. He allows himself these thoughts only while also allowing for darker possibilities, that his act will be misunderstood, that history prefers clean lines, that kindness often goes unfiled. The sign, once given, becomes a discipline. He keeps it without embellishment. He learns how mercy occupies the same air as danger and does not cancel it. He discovers an unexpected calm, the satisfaction of making a small exact correction to the course of things. No better than necessary, no less. Two aircraft with opposite assignments share a single strip of light. They track the same heading, the fighter half a wingspan away, a dark comma in the bomber's long, wounded sentence. He scans, sun angle, cloud, glint, the tree line's hint of other motion. He is not guarding his enemy from himself so much as guarding the choice already made from the 1,000 ways the world might erase it. Minutes widen inside this corridor. Each contains room for doubt to stretch and for fatigue to set small traps. He refuses both by staying busy with craft, little trims, throttle whispers, the small geometry the body knows at a level below language. He monitors fuel and accepts the math. Range shrinking, options narrowing. He has already spent something that can't be tallied. Now he spends measured items, time, distance, a portion of anonymity. In the fortress, men continue their urgent domesticity. Lines are checked again, improvised wrappings retied, belief redistributed to the places where the structure still answers. The navigator smooths a map as if neatness might persuade fate. The pilot keeps contact with the airplane's living will, asking and being asked in the grammar of pressure and response. The presence off the wing does not grant safety. It grants possibility. Sometimes that is the rarer gift. Below, the coastline lifts from idea to geography, color shifting from haze to certainty. He measures the distance not only in miles but in questions. When to brake, how to explain, whether explanation is owed to anyone at all. The sun thins from brass to pale gold, shadows lengthen, the day begins to choose a tone for its memory. For a narrow span of sky the war becomes translucent, and through it shows the simple truth it usually conceals. Men can decide. The escort is not a spectacle. It is maintenance, like tending a small flame in wind. It requires patience, attention, humility. He discovers he is good at it. He keeps the flame. He holds the line. He lets mercy do its work without asking it to prove itself by glitter. Cloud gathers with theatrical timing, a gray curtain preparing its fall, while the land ahead hardens into a promise he can nearly touch. Fuel, range, risk. He weighs them without drama. The escort cannot be infinite. Even grace must keep one eye on physics. He lowers a wing in farewell, a thinner echo of the earlier sign, a gesture designed to be understood and promptly released, felt rather than stored. He peels away into the white, sound diminishing to rumor, and then to absence. In the bomber's cockpit, no one cheers. They do not wave. They stay on the work that keeps them alive. Heading, attitude, engine temperatures, the thin thread of intention stretched toward a runway they cannot yet see. Gratitude will become words later or silence, depending on the men they are when the ground comes back. For now, continuation is thanks enough. In his own aircraft, doctrine reasserts its familiar authority. Check, scan, listen, adjust. Yet it feels somehow roomier, as if the act just taken has opened windows in a house he's lived in for years. He does not rehearse explanations. He does not rehearse regret. The value of the choice does not depend on audience. It belongs to the men who will live, and to him, who will live with himself. He sets a heading toward the strip of order scraped from frozen ground, and imagines the first chirp of tires, the hydraulic sigh, the warm stink of earth through engine heat. He anticipates the questions that never sound like questions. How was it? Did you see them? How many? He considers the safest answer. Numbers, as if the day were merely a ledger. He considers the truest answer and knows he will keep it in the vault for now. A truth can be both fragile and indestructible. It survives best when not handled by everyone at once. Behind him, a damaged airplane moves through diminishing sky toward a horizon that is finally, mercifully, getting closer. Ahead of him a form awaits, a cup, a mirror. He intends to meet each without looking away. The field returns as a geometry of comfort. Strip, lights, snow scuffed by tires, men in parkas moving like punctuation along the sentence of the runway. Pattern entry, checks, the aircraft easing from intention back into weight. Wheels kiss and complain, the airframe relaxes, the prop wash becomes a domestic wind. He rolls out with the practiced thrift of motion that marks a good landing, turns at the appointed point, and lets the engine cool the way a story cools at its end, slowly, with aftersounds. They run toward him with the old choreography, chalks, signals, thumbs. The canopy slides and winter climbs in, smelling of oil and iron. Questions arrive disguised as routine. Fuel state, ammunition expended, engine temperatures, contacts sighted. He answers in numbers, as if the day were merely arithmetic. He has learned that numbers are the safest clothes to dress the truth in. They hide curves the tailor cannot explain. Inside the hut, the map waits with its pins, the board with its empty lines and its chalked names that ask to remain names. Debrief begins its careful ritual: time on target, altitude, enemy strength, claims if any. He offers minimal color and no music. The pencil scratches, a clerk nods. Someone makes a minor joke to keep the gods sleepy. He exhales on cue. The act he carried through the sky sits quietly in the room, neither saint nor spy, just a fact that prefers not to be handled. He notes, as always, the small survivals: steam curling from mugs, a mechanic rubbing warmth into his hands, the smell of something fried that promises normal life exists somewhere close. He can feel the body begin to settle its accounts: adrenaline traded for fatigue, vigilance traded for an ache behind the eyes. When he stands, the floor insists upon itself, and he must remember how to be heavier. Later, in the mirror that has no rank, he tests his face for news. It holds. He can recognize the man in it without translating. He files the day not as triumph or confession, but as maintenance performed on the part of himself that still answers when addressed by his given name. Outside, the last light drains from the field. Inside, he chooses the oldest luxury of the living. He plans breakfast. There is a procedure for nearly everything that happens in the air. For this, there is none. Paperwork thrives on clarity. Conscience does not. If he speaks truly, he risks misunderstanding measured in rank and in rumor. If he says nothing, he risks something slower, the erosion that comes when a true thing is not allowed to breathe. Between those risks lies a narrow hallway where professionals walk without touching the walls. Silence, he discovers, has subdivisions. There is the tactical silence of the radio discipline he respects. There is the strategic silence that keeps a squadron steady by offering the familiar story. And there is the private silence that protects a fragile alignment inside the chest. He chooses all three tonight. He will not lie. He will not volunteer. He will store the act not as contraband, but as a tool for later use, a calibration of self. Doctrine presents its appeal in crisp fonts: intercept, press, break, report. Doctrine has often been his strongest ally and remains so now. Nothing he did contradicts its physics. Yet he sees the blank space around the paragraphs, the margin in which a pilot must be a person. Manuals describe performance envelopes for machines. They rarely acknowledge the envelope of the soul, the edges beyond which you cannot go and still come back as yourself. In the mess, talk returns to the safe orbit: weather, maintenance, a story about a bicycle that refuses to stay repaired. The laughter is thin and right. He finds comfort in the small mechanics of peace: a spoon scraping a bowl, boots drying by a stove, the way steam beads on a window and runs down like simple rain. He says goodnight in the language of his trade: short, unadorned, loyal to the task of tomorrow. In bed, the room breathes with other men's fatigue. Sleep posts its guards and waits. He allows the day to reassemble, not as an argument, but as a series of images: a face through glass, a gloved hand lifted, the wing that dipped just enough. He asks himself the pilot's plainest question: would you do it again? And here's the plainest answer: yes. He turns his pillow to the cool side and lets the engines in his head wind down to silence that is earned rather than imposed. Across the sea, another landing unwinds in the ragged grammar of damage. The bomber limps into pattern, hydraulics wheezing like tired bellows, wheels finding the runway with the gratitude of knees on stone. Fire crews pace the roll, faces hard with competence and soft with the relief they never admit to. When the ship stops, the air goes out of the men inside as if a fist unclenched. They step onto ground that remembers their weight. Counting begins, the oldest arithmetic, names said aloud. A pause where one should answer and does not. The quiet afterward in which the living rearrange themselves. The pilot touches metal, as if to thank it without superstition. The co-pilot laughs one note too loudly. The navigator rubs a map stain that will not lift. A gunner, hands still smelling of cordite and cold, finds his legs unreliable and prefers to sit until the earth grows used to him. In the debrief tent, words return to their narrow channels: altitude, bearing, flak, fighters, and then must widen to carry an event no form expects. A fighter pulled alongside, a dip of the wing, an escort that felt like being believed in. The officer taking notes raises an eyebrow and lowers it again. He has filed stranger testimonies under the heading of fog and war. He writes anyway because writing is how the system proves it listens, even when it doubts. That night, the image installs itself with the intimacy of a memory you did not invite and cannot dismiss. Men lie on bunks under blankets that smell of soap and damp wool and see a canopy framed in sun, a pair of eyes that did not become a shot, a brief corridor of sky where war forgot itself. No one says miracle. They say headings and fuel, yet in the borderland between speech and sleep, gratitude conducts its quiet liturgy. Letters home compress the day to what families can bear. We got back. Ship took a beating. Boys were brave. As for the rest, some choose to include the mystery and some to omit it, not from secrecy but from reverence. You do not use every word you know on a thing that saved your life. You protect it with fewer. War is an archivist with a taste for columns. It loves tallies, sorties, tonnage, promotions, losses, the grand abstractions that can be stacked and displayed. Exceptions do not photograph well. Mercy is uncooperative with metrics. It happens in small rooms and leaves little debris. Official memory skims the surface. Unofficial memory keeps the depths. Years begin their long, efficient work. The fighter returns to missions that rhyme. The bomber pilot to routes that repeat with indifferent weather. New crews arrive, new aircraft smell of dope and paint, new maps are pinned with the same serious fingers. History gathers momentum by multiplying ordinary days. The extraordinary lives disguised within them and declines to raise its hand. Yet memory has its private institutions. They require no funding and never close. A man turns a photograph face down before sleep, because it is noisy with ghosts. Another keeps a medal in a drawer and never learns which action it honors. A third stops at a window when late light hits the glass just so, and for a moment he is in the air again, arguing gently with gravity and fate. The act we follow, one wing dipped, a trigger not pulled, continues its quiet rounds, visiting its owners, checking the locks. Stories leak at the edges of reunions and funerals, in kitchens where voices lower and grow warmer. Someone says, "You won't believe this," and someone else replies, "Try me." A truth travels by hand more than by headline. It acquires the patina of objects handled respectfully, less bright than new metal, more convincing. The world that catalogs thunder sometimes forgets the music of softness. That does not mean the music stops. In this way, an unrecorded armistice survives the vast editorial appetite of war. It lives because it is repeated in other places by other people in their own precise disguises. A medic pausing before a face, a villager opening a door that could have stayed shut, a soldier lowering a weapon by a degree that turns death into warning. The archive that matters grows by such margins and is bound not in leather but in the lives that proceed because someone hesitated well. Afterward, the world rehearses its old roles. Streets, shops, weather returning to their posts with a competence that feels like mercy. Clocks regain their civil meanings. A whistle calls men to trains that go to ordinary places. The brutal novelty of survival fades into the older novelty of living. Yet the body keeps its index of the war, a cross-referenced ledger that opens when a motorcycle backfires, when fog lies low, when a certain metal smell rides a summer wind. He learns the customs of peace, standing in line without scanning rooftops, listening to a child's story with both ears, accepting that the sound in the night is plumbing, not engines overhead. Work accumulates in his hands, tools, papers, the weight of a loaf. He discovers hours that contain nothing more perilous than a stubborn hinge. The discovery does not make him careless. It makes him grateful in a key so low most cannot hear it. At a kitchen table, another man, once the pilot of a wounded ship, touches a mug and feels the old tremor pass through his fingertips like a remembered chord. He does not hide it. The people who love him have learned not to flinch when history walks a quick circle in the room. They set a plate before it and let it eat a little of the present, because that is how the present remains whole. The choice made in the sky lives on as a kind of climate inside both men. It does not dominate, it conditions. It teaches them to step half a pace slower when anger tries to sprint. It invites them to spare a second where seconds are cheap and compassion can be expensive only if you hoard it. The past is not a chain, but a tool. Held correctly, it repairs. Peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of softer noises. A pencil on a shopping list, a dog shifting in sleep, the low conversation of rain with windowsills. In that register, the memory finds a home that does not require explanation. You can be grateful without testifying, changed without announcing. When they meet their own eyes in a mirror, each recognizes a man who once dipped a wing toward life and has been practicing that gesture quietly ever since. Time, which first separated them, begins to stitch. It works in subtle threads, a newspaper clipping folded into a book, a photograph on a museum wall that refuses to be anonymous, a name overheard at a veterans hall that tugs at memory like a small, persistent tide. On one side of an ocean, a former bomber pilot tells a grandson, only the contour, never the drama, about a morning when an enemy's wing dipped and a corridor of sky opened. The boy asks what the man's name was. The pilot realizes he does not know, and the not knowing becomes a task. On another coast, a retired fighter, tidy in habits and sparse in claims, attends a reunion and answers the routine questions with the same respectful economy. "Did you get many?" "Enough," he says, meaning the number that let him live and dislike counting. Then, uninvited, a picture visits, a fortress torn open like a book unfinished, a hand raised not to plead but to testify, the way sunlight wrapped a canopy frame in wedding ring gold. He does not say it aloud. He wonders, as he always has, whether that crew reached ground with the world still attached to it. Letters begin, hesitant, formal, careful not to trespass on griefs that might be sleeping. Associations take up the thread, tracing serial numbers like family trees, comparing logbooks, turning stories into coordinates. Archivists become detectives and priests by turns, absolving errors of memory, anointing coincidences blessed by patience. A photograph emerges of a bomber on a day that matches the weather in the old men's minds. A combat report mentions an escort where no escort should have been. An entry in a fighter's log, fuel state, ammunition remaining, time of return, aligns with the hour a crippled crew crossed a coastline and did not die. The telephone, plain, domestic, unimpressed by the size of what it is about to hold, rings. A voice, steady and older than the uniform it once wore, says a name that tastes like a gamble. The name is answered by another name, and after a silence that tightens and loosens at once, the two decide upon a meeting. Geography, once an enemy, volunteers to be a bridge. The sky that separated them will be the backdrop when they close the distance it left. They enter the room like men stepping onto a familiar airfield whose layout has changed. The furniture is ordinary, chairs with patient arms, a table conducting negotiations between coffee and photographs. But the air is dense with rehearsed sentences uncertain of their order. Each carries a body's worth of history with the gait of someone who has learned to walk while holding fragile things. They reach for each other and hesitate in the same millisecond, then complete the handshake that has been circling them for decades. Grip recognizes grip. This used to be how you reassured an airplane. Firm, deliberate, nothing extra. The pressure adjusts, then stays. Their eyes do the work their hands began, scanning the face across from them for damage and for proof. "You were there," each says without sound. "You did it," each replies, also voiceless. The room, which earlier seemed too small, reveals new square footage as if memory could push back walls by the width of a relief. Speaking comes in short takeoffs, landings improve quickly. The bomber pilot describes the sound of fabric tearing in wind, the smell of hot metal and frozen blood, the way the corridor of mercy slowed time without stopping it. The fighter recounts not deeds but details, how frost made halos where breath touched glass, how the trigger has a first pressure that feels like a promise, how a wing can dip by a thought before it dips by emotion. They trade images until the separate films splice into one reel. There are interruptions, kindly and right. Someone brings cake with the gravity of an offering. A daughter adjusts a frame so the light will treat the old men gently. Laughter, a sound that fought its way back into their lives long ago, learns a new pitch here, one that contains relief without erasing grief. When silence returns, it is companionable. Certain questions present themselves and are not asked because the answers already live in the air between them. At the table lies a photograph from that winter, contrails like chalk lines, a sun that knew too much. They look, not for proof, but for blessing. If a camera had been in the cockpit, they decide, the picture would have shown two faces occupying one duty, to remain human in the air and on the ground afterward. They stand to leave and discover that standing takes less effort. Passageways inside the chest, long blocked, have opened. Brother is a word with borders, family, oath, uniform. Today it crosses them without a passport. They try it on cautiously and find it fits, not as a costume, but as a garment that belonged to them before they knew they owned it. Brother, says the bomber pilot, and the fighter answers, brother, with the small surprise of someone recognizing a melody he thought he had invented. The people around them understand instinctively that something ceremony cannot confer has been conferred. They compare peace times the way veterans once compared aircraft, handling, quirks, maintenance. One learned to sleep through rain only after trusting rain to be nothing else. The other found that the sound of a bicycle chain could rewind him to a runway in winter if he let it. Both carried the habit of scanning, doorways, rooftops, faces, and learned slowly to let the world approach without first interrogating it. They agree that quiet work, fixing a hinge, nursing a garden, showing a child how to read weather, proved to be the runway where their lives landed safely, over and over. Stories arrive like carefully wrapped packages. The paper is saved. They open the day when mercy took the shape of an aircraft silhouette and place it on the table between them, where objects of use belong. It is not relic, but tool. By its edge they measure other choices. They speak softly of losses, using first names and no ranks, because grief prefers the vernacular. When they run out of words, they sit shoulder to shoulder and let the absence be the speaker. The room knows how to hold that weight. It was built for ordinary furniture and turns out to be strong enough for holy uses. The cameras, if there are cameras, behave respectfully, learning the limits of looking. The lens records not spectacle, but repair. Two men adjusting history's posture so it can stand straight without leaning on excuses. Letters will come later from strangers who watched and felt permission blooming in their ribs. The permission to refrain, to soften, to refuse a simple story when a true one is available. They make plans. Not because time is generous, but because making plans is how the living endorse their own existence. A visit here, a commemorative flight there, a lecture to a class that believes history is a list until someone teaches it to breathe. As they part, the handshake from the beginning returns, altered by knowledge. Grip recognizes grip again, this time adding a promise. We will spend what remains in a currency that holds its value. Attention, restraint, gratitude, without spectacle. It is tempting to polish a choice until it becomes a lesson. Clean edges, engraved moral, suitable for display. They resist the temptation together. The decision at altitude was not tidy. It contained fear, calculation, stubbornness, and something like love that refused to be named in uniform. It happened inside constraints. Fuel, doctrine, command. And it happened anyway. This both men consider important. Heroism that requires special effects is useful. The kind that fits in a cockpit is indispensable. They talk about cost, because cost is how reality certifies meaning. The fighter risked suspicion, the erasure that can follow kindness done in unfashionable directions. He also risked becoming a person he could not abide, a man accurate in enemy counts and impoverished in sleep. The bomber crew risked belief, accepting a stranger's mercy without evidence it would last. To trust for a minute while dying is to place a wager larger than survival. Both wagers paid out in lives, interest compounding slowly across decades in children, kitchens, and mornings that began quietly and stayed that way. Choice, they decide, is not an event, but a practice. It requires maintenance like any airframe, inspections after rough weather, lubrication against friction, replacement of parts that fatigue even when they look whole. You do not make a single merciful decision and retire from the craft. You keep trimming your course with small corrections, an extra listen, a withheld word, a welcome where a wall would be quicker. The tools are simple and always within reach. The difficulty lies in remembering to lift them. They speak too of systems, because systems shape skies. Institutions train, brief, equip, and sometimes exhaust. But within them lives the small room no order can enter, where a person writes today's one-sentence constitution. In that room, the fighter discovered a sovereignty that did not cancel duty, it deepened it. In that room, the bomber crew chose to believe in the signal of a dipped wing long enough to get home. Sovereignty of this sort is contagious when encountered. It travels by example rather than decree. If there is a moral, and they are careful with the word, it is not that mercy is easy or always safe. It is that mercy is a form of precision, the right action taken at the right moment for reasons that can survive daylight. Precision of this kind scales. A cockpit is large enough for it, so is a classroom, a hospital corridor, a border crossing, a living room where anger tries to occupy too much air. Practice in one arena prepares a hand for another. Look up. The sky above today's errands carries no uniform and keeps no ledger. Its blue is the same pigment war borrowed for a while and returned without apology. Clouds move in their ancient economy, arrival, transformation, release, teaching, if one is willing to learn, that passage is not the same as loss. Somewhere a runway listens for tires. Somewhere a museum tag shortens a long story responsibly. Somewhere a child hears how a wing dipped and discovers that restraint can be as brave as attack. He had him in his sights. The enemy was helpless, bleeding, drifting through the sky. One pull of the trigger, and he'd be a hero. But he saw faces. Not enemies, men. That day, he made a choice. He let them live. And 40 years later, the men he spared called him brother. Hold the frame a moment longer. The light through cloud is not a benediction. It is weather doing what weather does. The meaning is ours to supply, carefully, the way a mechanic supplies torque, enough to hold, not enough to strip. Let the camera find the empty air where the escort once flew, the corridor of mercy no instrument recorded. Listen for the faintest sound left by it, a hush in which another choice, somewhere, becomes thinkable. Roll credits not over triumph, but over competence. Crews who launched, families who endured, clerks who filed truths no one knew how to classify, teachers who will tell this story without sharpening it into a knife. End on the idea that goodness is less a banner than a behavior, a dipped wing, a held tongue, a door left open one more second than necessary. To be human is to choose. Not once, not grandly, but as weather, again and again, in conditions good and poor, with visibility variable, fuel adequate, and the landing always, always worth making.